Hello, good evening and welcome back. So Vox is back at it again. No, not the website, but instead the Spanish party. As the BBC report, coronavirus anti-lockdown car protest draws thousands, and they particularly focus on Vox because they're labelled as far-right. What they mean by this is a bit too authoritarian and left-wing, really, because they are concerned about fifth columnists, just like Stalin was, of course, in the USSR, of people being within the country or the empire or the union, if you will, who don't want the best for that and instead wish to take over the country, the nation. And they're concerned that people who follow a particular ideology which runs counter to what Spain stands for are intending to take it over through subversive tactics and try to get a foothold within the country and then develop their own cultures and ideologies further to try and persuade people and take them over and cause harm if they don't, and try to get as many people as possible within Spain so when the time comes they can then overpower their so-called oppressors as far as they're viewed. And that's how a fifth column works. Of course, Stalin was concerned about that with various ethnic minorities in the USSR. He was very paranoid and hence he killed a load of people close to him as he was concerned about fifth columnists. And I'm using that as an example to try and say that this can happen anywhere. If someone is concerned about someone who is close to them is actually meaning them harm, it's a form of paranoia, and that's the idea of fifth columnists. So you don't have to say it's far right or far left, but it tends to be people who are more authoritarian are more concerned about that because they're trying to get greater control and they care about what other people are doing. They're not laissez-faire, if you will. So with that in mind, of course, they're concerned about their borders and their people. And with this particular issue in mind, they are concerned about unemployment and what people are going to be able to do if there are no longer enough jobs, but there are still a load of people and too many people that the infrastructure can support and that there are jobs for if people aren't creating jobs. So then immigration is back on the playing cards, if you will. The other thing that the Vox Party stands for is they want more centralization, so they don't care much for Catalan or Gibraltar being separate. Therefore, they wish for a greater unification of Spain and might be okay with immigration from Latin America, South America, those countries, if they are of Spanish origin. Essentially, they would keep that route open, but otherwise they're looking more for people who are of that origin and want a more homogeneous country. That's about it. So, the far-right Vox Party urged supporters to drive through major cities without leaving their vehicles in order to maintain social distancing. So they're saying we're going to follow the law while we protest the law. Fair enough. Surely that's acceptable. That is a peaceful protest. So Spain imposed the restrictions on the 14th of March, but it has eased restrictions recently. But Madrid and Barcelona, if you will, have remained under tight lockdown due to their more severe outbreaks of COVID-19. As you would expect, if it is a more densely populated area, then you'd get more cases. Both cities will begin to relax their curbs from Monday by allowing outdoor dining and gatherings of up to 10 people. What a treat. So, because the 2-month lockdown has seen hotels, bars and restaurants closed, as well as beaches and other outdoor attractions, just like we've seen around the rest of the world, people are getting a bit frustrated, as you would expect, and they're saying, well, if I can't have enough to feed my family, to have a home, to make ends meet, and if you're telling me that I'm not allowed to try and make them meet, if you're saying that there's going to be a government stimulus package at which point you're going to increase tax rates and then we're going to have to pay it back soon, and therefore we're still going to struggle to get by, then we're not really a fan of it. We understand the essence of loans, but we don't want to have to take one out against our own will, and that is what they're doing with taxes here. Similar thing with social security, really, and state pensions, but that's a whole other government mismanagement issue. So the government says this has allowed it to get the outbreak under control and the daily death toll has been gradually declining. But at what cost? Of course, it's not lives versus jobs, it's lives versus lives. So they have here the Vox leader Santiago Abascal. As they say, almost 1 million jobs were lost in March alone, and forecasts suggest the Spanish economy will contract by up to 12% this year as a result of the pandemic. In any other time you'd go, hey, just an increase of just a couple of percentage points of unemployment and a decrease of just a few percentage points of the economy is going to be dreadful, dreadful news. Not because the economy is some amorphous blob, but because it is people's lives. So these demonstrators called for both Mr. Sanchez and Deputy Prime Minister Pablo Iglesias, who heads the left-wing Podemos party, to step down over the handling of the crisis, and to quote, "It is time to make a big noise against the government of unemployment and misery that has abandoned our self-employed and workers." Which is exactly what this all comes down to. It comes down to individualism and libertarianism, I suppose, if you will. If that really is what Vox stands for, it seems to be a bit of a tight squeeze, because they're putting in parameters, albeit rather broad parameters, but nonetheless they're saying, we don't want mosques or Islam here, basically, which is understandable. We don't want foreign ideology that wishes to take us over and to colonize the world. Of course, you don't want that there. That's fully understandable. And therefore, with those parameters, then they're saying, yes, you can do what you want, but we're within these, and we're going to be very, very strict about them. And at that point, it goes, well, okay, but with anybody who is that set against things, you are of course concerned about authoritarianism rising up. But as of yet, it all seems okay, and instead they're just taking this as political potshots, if you will, in order to try and take down the opposition, to say anything they're doing is wrong, which is exactly what you expect. So the party's leader, Santiago Abascal, led the protest from an open-top bus in Madrid. He wore a face mask, again following the guidelines, and accused the government of being directly responsible for the worst management of the crisis on the entire planet. So he said, "Let your desire be heard for the resignation of the government." We saw other protests in Seville, Barcelona, and other regional capitals. And of course, the UK, US, and Brazil have also seen anti-lockdown protests. And so these protests, which we've seen in Michigan as well, when they were done through cars, that they do follow social distancing. Only then, after they're not listened to, do they then decide, well, hey, if we're following your rules, well, you're not listening to us, then we're not going to follow your rules, and we still want you to listen to us. That is the idea of the government agreement, of course. So else in Spain, of course, they're suffering in various ways. Well, they said that they've had 28,000 recorded deaths and 234,000 cases. Is this necessarily accurate? No, not really, given how deaths are reported. But they have had declining death tolls, so that's always good news. No matter what caused it, the final result of fewer deaths is definitely good news. Will the people live much longer anyway? Not really, if you see who's the most at-risk group, and it's mainly comorbidities anyway, so they're going to die of something quite soon, and then they just get something else, and that seems to be the straw that broke the camel's back. So does it make much of a difference? Probably not. This coronavirus in particular definitely seems to be survival of the fittest. It doesn't seem to be just a kind of fluke thing and, oh, you got unfortunate. It does kind of be a thing of, you've got it, you're going to die soon anyway, and this is just wiped you off a bit more. So if you're looking at it from an economical standpoint, then of course it's quite favourable for the economy if you just let the ones who are off work die sooner. Of course, that's good for the economy as a whole, and that's why then you get people stepping in with charitable donations and doing what they wish to do. So as we're seeing from Spain, of course you're going to see any opposition saying that the government is doing a bad job. They're going to have their own suggestions, and they're going to hope that the government doesn't actually listen to them, so that they don't have to take responsibility for the actions and they're not held accountable. And instead they can always say that the government is doing something wrong and that they should have done this. And hopefully then at some point they will be put into power, and then they'd like to be right, because then they're going to be held to account, and therefore they're going to be much more conservative about what they wish to put forward, because they're concerned that they will actually be held accountable. And if they just do a little bit, then they can still blame it on the opposition to say we couldn't get through as much as we wanted to, and if we could, then we would have been able to do better. And that's just politics in a nutshell, really. So that's what we'd expect. But still, it's always good to see what's going on in the rest of Europe, seeing as Brexit is going through, and of course Vox Party doesn't like the European Union either. So any other country that is picking up a nationalist side of things and wants secession from the Union will be fantastic for future Brexit negotiations as the time goes on and things are kind of almost wrapping up, if you will, that Britain has finally said, no, we're making a stand here. We're not going to let it go on any further. So it's important to know what's going on in Spain because it's good for us. And with that good news in mind, until next time, have a good one.